Karina. So as Karina said, we're working on several pieces of supplementary guidance to the overarching guidelines. And I'm going to talk to you about the guidance note on the management of asbestos in parklands and reserves. So the target audience for this is local government authorities, other parkland managers, so maybe DoH, and consultants, obviously. In councils, we think it's likely to be most relevant to environmental health teams and parkland teams. So we do have some existing guidance available out there that was published in 2011. We think it's time for an update, primarily to capture some of the lessons that we've learnt and strategies we've learnt along the way in working with local governments. So the guideline will apply to passive use parklands. Those are parklands that are designed for primarily passive recreation pursuits, such as walking and hiking, picnicking, some incidental sports. But these are really distinct from active use parklands where you have playgrounds, playing fields, school ovals and pump tracks. So what do these parklands look like? They'll often have remnant bushland associated with them, and there'll be designated pathways through them, and users are really encouraged or often restricted by dense vegetation and other things to stay to those paths. Similarly, wetlands as well might have similar passive use areas around them, walk trails, picnic areas. So we understand that passive use areas may be co-located with active use parks. So you might have a playground on the periphery of a passive use parkland, but those active use areas will require more targeted remediation in line with the full guideline approach. So what are the sources of contamination on these parklands? Historical uncontrolled dumping, so fly tipping. There might have been old municipal waste pits, filled gravel pits, and also poor demolition and removal practices from former on-site structures. The guidelines won't apply to where friable asbestos is present. So if your site history and initial observations indicate that commercial wastes are present, then you'd need to consider for that and go to the full guideline approach. So why develop targeted guidance for parklands and reserves? Look, we recognise that we're talking about low exposure scenarios here, given the nature of the use of these parklands, and also that local governments are managing vast areas of land with quite limited resources, and that also complete removal or full-scale remediation is often not going to be practical without removing established vegetation, and that has other effects that, affects amenity and has other environmental health effects. So the principles that we'd like to capture in the guidelines, our approach is that it should be practical with an emphasis on prevention. They should be implementable and achievable and proportionate to risk. So with a focus on preventing contamination, this could include physical barriers to prevent further illegal dumping, so bollards and fencing at access tracks, regular inspections of frequently used areas, and also signs at key entry points, advertising the infringements that apply for illegal dumping, and also providing contact information for people to report issues and incidents. With a strong focus on early identification is what we're wanting to capture, and as has already been discussed today, if fly tipping and dumping can be identified early, then it can be dealt with as a simple surface clean-up, and you might avoid reporting the site under the Contaminated Sites Act. So we'll also aim to capture guidance around the investigation, remediation and management of impacts in parklands and reserves. And in this, we'd like to support the prioritising of these efforts in the accessible areas of the site, the areas that have more frequent and intense use, areas that are prone to erosion, areas requiring surface and subsurface maintenance. So we would look to see additional remediation efforts in areas where workers are routinely having to access subsurface soils, and also in response to areas where there's been significant community concern. So we would expect some additional efforts in those areas where there's heightened community concern. The sorts of remediation and management options that we think will be useful in these sorts of settings might be regular handpicks of a site and additional handpicks before periods of heavy use, so before holiday periods and other events, and after significant weather events. Surface stabilising measures across paths, restricting off-path usage with signage and vegetative barriers. Also maintaining existing vegetation, or where that's not being maintained, where it's died off, we'd like to see efforts to revegetate those areas as well. And also targeted remediation prior to any parkland upgrades. So to support this slightly different approach to passive use parklands, a robust AMP would need to be in place, capturing the elements that I've already talked about. So that's strong focus on prevention and early identification, but also some really clear maps showing the areas of impact and the areas that have been remediated. And then a really clear commitment to the ongoing management of the asbestos at the park, with designated roles, responsibilities and schedules in place. We'd also look to see procedures to protect worker health and safety during routine maintenance activities. And in addition to that, some detail around contingency planning for when further impacts are identified. Like we've already said, that an AMP should be considered a living and iterative document, and so subject to regular review. And we also are looking to develop a series of templates as part of this, so some guidance documents and templates that local governments and other park managers can include and use. So to support all of this, we think key staff will need to be trained, and there'd be a role we see for that to be guided by WorkSafe. But in addition to that, then perhaps, I don't know how many EHOs are in the room, but we wonder if there's a role for EHOs to also support in-house training. But all of this is still to be workshopped with local governments being the primary audience here. So just finally, this is our consultation schedule. So quite soon we're intending to go to a targeted subgroup of local governments who we've worked closely with to use as an initial sounding board on our draft, and then a broader consultation draft will be released in mid-2020 with the plan to publish in mid-2022. But if anyone in the room would like to be part of that initial targeted consultation, if this is something that's really topical for you at the moment, then please get in touch and we can also include you in that initial consultation. So I guess, yeah, over to you. I don't know if this is something that if there's any initial thoughts on the usefulness of this.
So we're from Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage,
yeah.
And so, sorry. Hi, just here from Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage. So we manage Crown lands, so unmanaged reserves and unallocated Crown, unallocated Crown land. So just wondering if we could potentially have this guidance extended to that land tenure, because it's very similar types of issues, and yeah, we'd like to.
Yeah, and look, this won't be, so yes, we can have that explicitly included, and so
there's often where our land will be adjacent to Shire managed land, and it could be. And
similarly impacted.
Yeah.
Yeah, and certainly, yes, yes is a simple answer. And look, the way I see this, it's kind of a pop out of the broader guidelines. So it's what's in the guidelines, but it's tailoring it to this setting. So I think if there's an argument for it to be applied in any other setting, then we could support that.
We could include them in the January.
We can. Yep.
Do you need something for that?
Yep.
Also with DPLH, sorry. Well, how would you classify those sites at the end of the day? Would they be classified at all?
Had minor ACM.
Yeah, if there's an asbestos management plan in place, then we would probably require that that be classified remediated for restricted use, so that there's a requirement to make sure that plan's adhered to.
Just on that.
In effect, talking about a site where the material can't be easily remediated and is.
Yeah,
going
so
through
that's
an
the issue for us, is
yeah.
that
Yeah.
illegal, we cannot often easily, so we cannot often easily remediate illegal dumping.
You would be reporting and classifying those sites.
Yeah. And then, yeah, we support then efforts being focused on areas that are actually accessed by members of the public and workers.
Any other Q&A? Anything online?
There was one from before, so it's probably more